So we don't have to do a normal intro. We can do a crazy intro.
That's right.
That's right.
Okay, cool. We can just be like, welcome to Mistakes Were Made. We're doing
Midnight. Mistakes Were Made, the Midnight Special.
So we're doing a special mini instant reaction episode because polyamory is blowing up.
Instant reaction. The article that I'm reading is a month old.
Well, the article I read came out just like a week ago.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and it does feel like there is a polyamory mainstreaming moment happening
An
right
explosion.
now, for sure. And it kind of started, well, I want us to like collect our evidence, but I feel like you started hearing about a reality TV show that was going to be about couples looking for a third, and then there was like HGTV had a show that showed a couple or a throuple looking for a house that could accommodate them.
Really?
And then,
Wow.
what were the other examples
Have
that
you
were
heard any,
coming?
Jessica?
Oh, well, there's definitely other TV ones, like the new like Gossip Girl reboot had one of the teens. Well, 3 of the teens are in a throuple together. There's also, I can't remember the name of it, but the like Hugh Laurie spaceship show that it's supposed to be in like the, future. He has a husband and a wife back home, but they divorce him from space.
Oh, wow. Divorced from space.
That's-
Cold.
But together. The two of them divorce them at once?
They stay
Wow,
married.
cold-blooded. Okay.
Yeah.
I heard that
I think
the
that's how it works. But
spoiler, the end of Riverdale reveals that Betty, Veronica, Archie, and Jughead are all in a quad.
Can't believe Jughead made it in there. I mean,
Well, but that's because
Yeah.
he and Archie were always in love with each other.
that's what it is.
Duh.
Of course.
I mean, that was the most
Yeah. Oh my
interesting
God.
romantic arc of that entire comic
You're
series,
right.
if you ask
Archie
me.
and Jughead were fucking that whole time.
yeah.
Okay, I think
I mean,
that's
because
isn't-
Jughead fucks, for sure.
Oh, yeah, he does.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, but the rest of them
yeah.
always seem too square for him,
Right.
Jughead was like a beatnik, and he was always
Yeah.
like lounging around high in a hammock or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Just for the record, this is based on the paper comic books from like the 80s and
Oh, yeah.
90s.
I haven't seen
we
a
did
single
not
episode
watch
of the show of Riverdale.
No, and I think it ended like 3 years ago, so it's not breaking news.
Spoiler alert.
Wow. Go back and watch it so you can be mad at Sarah for spoiling it for you. Well, the article that I read for my homework, which I did, was from New York Magazine. It came out just like last week. I guess this is going to come out right away, so I can say the date without being ashamed. It came out on January 16th, 2024, and it was called, What Does a Polycule Actually Look Like? Meet Nick, Sarah, Anna, and Alex. And somebody sent it to me and was like, this you? Because it has a Sarah and an Alex. But no, I don't live in New York. I'm not in New York Magazine. But it was, so it followed, it's like a feature article. It followed 4 people who are in a polycule. One of the couple, like it's sort of the main couple, Nick and Sarah, are married. Guess where they met?
Okay, Cupid.
No. In person somewhere. Guess where? Come on, one guess.
Life Cafe.
No.
A
Obvious.
yoga class?
Burning Man. Oh, Burning Man.
Oh, man.
Come on, you guys could've guessed
We're
that.
fired, Sarah.
Yeah,
we really should have gotten.
And then
A yoga class?
Nick, yeah, you were trying too hard. And then Nick is also dating Anna. So Nick is like, the hinge, and then Anna is married to Alex. Anyway, so it goes through this like whole elaborate thing. This article made me feel like kind of stupid, where like my reading comprehension was bad. I had a hard time following what was going on with all of these people.
Complicated grammatical phrasing, or?
It might have been that I was like I was like at the kids' soccer practice, and then I was in the shower listening to it for part of it. So maybe it's my fault, but also I think it might have been perhaps because the people were all really the same and kind of boring.
Ah, yes.
I think it wasn't all my fault. And I don't think it was actually that the article was badly written either. But then I was also maybe, good things about it, or the things that it did was like it touched on the like talked about like the logistics of these relationships and like the scheduling challenges, and it did do a good job of like following them for a while or presenting it over time, and like talking about how the relationships evolved and like tracing them from their origins, and talking about like the interactions between the people in the polycule, and like digging into like how their relationships actually worked, and the fluidity of those, and like the jealousy that existed, and like the boundaries and rules that people had set up, and all of that stuff. So that was all like, I think, well executed, and for like an article that was clearly like written for outsiders, I think it did like a decent job of like explaining how this stuff all kind of plays out. So I wasn't mad at it for that part. But there were some things, honestly, the thing that made it hard to follow probably was mostly like who it was. And then it was hard to follow because the people weren't very developed because they were anonymized.
Oh.
And
that's a vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a vibe. And it was kind of like, the reason for that is like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm curious what you all think about that.
I want to bop in here.
Bop on.
And ask a couple of questions about the demographics of these people. Mm-hmm. We know they're from New York. Did you know anything else about their demographics, like class, race, sexual orientation, anything like that?
There was never any mention of non-heterosexual relationships.
Okay.
There was mention of like play parties, but nothing beyond that. And there was never any, then one of them was mentioned as, there was a part where they're like, Nick's entrepreneurial creative spirit, and then parenthetical, he works in tech.
Okay.
And there was a mention of how they, at one point, Sarah decides, spoiler alert, that she needs some space from living with Nick, and she just goes and gets an apartment to live by herself.
So they're
So
rich. We said that exactly at the same time.
Oh, wow. I would say material constraints did not exist for these people. No.
Okay.
Yes, they were rich. Yes.
So
They are rich.
I feel like this is an interesting place to kind of like enter talking about how polyamory has been mainstreaming more and more recently, and this like anonymizing thing feels relevant. These, I will not guess at their race, but these people sound like pretty privileged. They sound wealthy. They sound
Yes. They
Hetero.
were described.
hetero.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex. What were you going to say?
Their names are Nick, Sarah, Anna, and Alex. They're white.
They're
They
white.
were
They
actually
sound
described.
white.
She described them
went to
physically
Burning Man.
as in ways that cued that they were white. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so like that's a little bit of an assumption.
They're
obviously-
also. She actually came out and said that they were hot. She was like, "These people are intimidatingly hot," which I thought was funny.
So they probably are like small-bodied and attractive in, mainstream ways. So it gives me a feeling when people who fit that description want to be anonymous when they're talking about polyamory and non-monogamy. And I want to stop there and be like, why is that giving me a feeling? Because I don't think I would feel that way about everyone deciding to be anonymous when they were talking about it. But there's something about this particular demographic, it's kind of irking me.
It feels like, what are you actually risking, right? And I mean, we all have a background in journalism, and we have, on very rare occasions, used anonymous sources, but we know that it's like a really high bar generally, and it's like a deep conversation you want to have with the source, and like you're trying to establish a credible threat to life or livelihood, right?
Yeah, the threat to life or livelihood was usually the rubric my editors required of me. And I think there's something that is just like sits wrong with me, where it's like, okay, you all got tech money in New York, and you're just like have this pile of privilege, and you're like, I don't want to risk not even a single corner of it. This.
It feels like it's discomfort.
What do you think, Alex? Did that strike you when you were reading it?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just trying to find the place where they kind of explained away. The names in this story have been changed to protect their privacy. That's it. And then there's a part later on. I definitely thought about that and was kind of like, okay, but like, really? Like, what? How does their privacy need to be protected? And then later on, I think where it got worse was not just that, and the reasoning for that is the like accountability for the shit that you say is important, right? The reason that we don't give everybody anonymity is that you will, if you're anonymous, you'll say things that aren't true, not because you're lying, but because you're not accountable for what you're saying.
Right.
Right? Like, if I'm not me, then I can say whatever the fuck I want.
Right.
And it's not like I'm fabricating things, but I'm just not accountable for my words. And so, you know.
I'm glad you read this one, Alex, because I hit the paywall when I tried to click on it. But I read the other New York Magazine article about polyamory and like
The guide?
the guide. So
The guide was good, I thought.
Yeah, I thought so too. Well, and I'm sure we'll get there. But there was one tiny like profile of a person who worked as a public servant, and she talked about being very open in public with the fact that she was poly, and like in her little blurb sort of talked about how that had come about and what it had been like telling her colleagues, and how she was a little bit afraid to tell her boss, but everybody else was cool. And that was like my favorite thing in that entire article, you know? And then of course I got to the end of that article and they also were like, all the names have been changed.
Right. Yeah. And in that case, it seemed like she was kind of, well, I'm curious why you liked it, but I felt like it was like she was like talking about like the challenges of like being out and like, you're not going to be out to everybody necessarily. And it's going to be like a thoughtful decision who you're going to be out to. And like, I guess for these people in this article, it is like you would make the decision to be out to everyone in the whole world, and like when your name is Googled,
Right.
but
That's true.
there's like I feel like there's sort of a give and take that like you sort of decide to, you know, like fly that flag. I don't know, or like even just use your first name. I don't know. Where it got a little hairy for me is then later it says this. Something that this is Sarah talking. Something that comes up in polyamory is that you're navigating privacy, Sarah explains to me in a voice note message. Sarah is more reserved, especially when it comes to sharing details about, quote, tender situations, and she's also protective of the other members of her polycule. What one part of the polycule says about another could have huge, messy ripple effects throughout the whole group. There are things between her and her exes that Nick doesn't know about. There are things between her and Nick that Anna doesn't know about. And there are things she's working through with herself that are just for her. So reading between the lines, I think what happened is that the journalist ran into this messy territory where a bunch of people in the article kind of started to get cold feet about what they wanted to talk to her about and what they didn't. And just like started kind of backing off about like, oh, how am I going to be perceived and how is this going to impact my relationships? And like, how open can I be? And I think that's where it all became kind of muddled. And like was just like a hard article to read because I'm like, these people aren't being very honest with each other. And like to be like fair or compassionate, like this is a thing that like we struggle with on this podcast. Like I say shit and then I'm like, oh, I said that thing that like probably sounded weird to my other partner or whatever. So like that's real, but and
I feel
it
like
made the article hard to
understand.
Yeah.
And we have more practice with our personal lives being out in the world. And so I think my gauge on this can be off sometimes because of my experience with it as a journalist, writer, podcaster. But I think it still speaks to something. There's like something here about like privilege and the way polyamory is being presented as it's like entering into the zeitgeist in a new way. And there's something here that like doesn't quite sit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess my conclusion at the end of it was kind of like, let these people just talk about themselves, or like, why is a third party coming in and trying to write about these people, you know, and like why these people in particular, they don't think it doesn't really seem like they're like confident. Ready or confident.
Yeah.
And it's like, maybe you're trying to make them sound, it doesn't really seem like they found the right people. They're not comfortable talking to each other about their feelings, like throughout the polycule. And so, and like, why are we doing this? Why do I have to read this?
Did they say how long they'd been practicing polyamory?
Well, it was kind of like a mix. And part of what is going on in the article is like the sort of explanation and unpacking of that. They weren't like all brand new to it, but there was like a lot of sort of like different levels of kind of like a discomfort showing up in different places. And like definitely one thing that came up was like a lot of the tropes are there in interesting ways, but like they talked about like control and being uncomfortable giving up control in various iterations. And there's one part where like the one guy is like trying to stop one of his partners from having sex with her other partners, and like you can do everything else but you can't have sex. And like that kind of like exertion of control and like fear of like giving up.
That's so interesting to me because I'm like, tell me you're straight without telling me you're straight. I'm like, ooh, what's this everything else?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What's doth sex?
Sure, that's fine. I'll do the what's everything else.
Does he mean like, going out to dinner, or does he mean in the bedroom?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything that's not scary for him.
Right.
You imagine.
Okay, interesting. So what would you say this kind of like left you with? You and I and Jess and a lot of other people in our lives have been talking about, like, it seems like every single day something new about polyamory is dropping, and it's generally for people who don't know anything about it, haven't experienced it, or encountering it for the first time. So what did this kind of leave you feeling?
I like read some of the comments, and they were very predictable. It left me with like, this is an article that is like kind of voyeuristic and catering to people who kind of want to shit on this lifestyle. Maybe it's like serving up, a steak dinner for those people. But alongside that article, they published a practical guide to modern polyamory, which I thought was like very well executed, super useful. We should put it in the show notes. Like, highly recommend like reading that.
Who wrote it, and what did you like about it?
I just hit the paywall, so I don't know.
I wonder if I still have it open.
What I liked about it was it just kind of like really kind of like even-handedly and efficiently addressed like everything by like asking a lot of people very sort of straightforward questions, like, what rules should you have, what's it going to be like, how do you handle jealousy, what should you do when you come home from a date, just like
cool, all
sorts of stuff like that. And it was like very concise, and none of the answers were bad. And it just like has an index, like, wait, what is a metamor? It does like defines all the terms. How do I bring this up with my partner? Should we come up with rules? How do I meet people? It talks about dating as a couple. It talks about, some of the things that could possibly go wrong, like your initial hierarchy breaking down, your relationships transitioning. Should we tell our kids? That was actually the one section that I thought was very poorly executed, because it was just like a copy and paste job from the book More that you're going to talk about in a second. And that was like just her being like, I lied to my kids for years and years. And then when they found out, I
continued lying to them.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
No.
But all the rest of
Heavy
it.
disagree.
Yeah. The rest of it, the advice was very sound and very short.
And because, like, I can't remember the number, but they talked to lots and lots of people who have been practicing polyamory for short and long periods of time. And
cool.
Most of the article is directly coming from them. And it's like specific anecdotes and examples of things that have happened to them.
Oh, that's great.
Things that went well or mistakes that were made.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. And I will say the person who wrote the first article, What Does a Polycule Actually Look Like? Allison P. Davis, I think she did a good job with kind of what she had, or maybe what they were trying to do, but I don't think she was working with the right people, essentially.
Yeah, and I think there is this mistake that media makes, and I've been a member of the media for many, many years, and I have made this mistake too, which is you kind of go after what you think are the most mainstream, relatable people to represent a trend. So they're like, aha, we've got some wealthy, hot, straight white people.
Right.
These are the people our readers will connect with. So this is like the kind of source we want to have. And it's like, to represent a marginalized lifestyle, you don't want a bunch of other marginalized identities in there. It's going to be too, I don't know,
too confusing
and scary for my audience. And I say that fully accepting responsibility for having done this myself over the years. So I get it. And I think often journalists are really trying. They're like, how do I pitch this to an editor? How do I make this something that people will want to read? How do I make it seem relatable? There's a lot of needles that you're threading there. But I think that this is consistently the issue that I'm having with how polyamory is being represented right now. Because there are people who have been practicing it far longer than we have. There are communities who have been practicing it far longer. There's like a long tradition or history, at least, of polyamory in this country that you could draw on. It's a little bit like, oh, did some hot people in New York just discover this and now they're the experts? You know, like that, it feels a little thin.
And so are those hot people.
And so are those hot people. So yeah, sounds like there was some good stuff there. There were some good attempts, but it's kind of...
Yes. Good stuff for us to poop on.
Yeah, I mean, that's not what I'm trying to do.
No. I'm
just trying to...
I'm proud to be a hater.
No, I'm not. I don't, and I really don't like hating on journalists, honestly.
No, you can hear me not hating. I mean, the other thing is, like, I'm just looking at her picture, but the person who wrote it appears to be a black woman. And it's interesting to, like, think about her navigating a bunch of rich white people.
Again, we're still assuming all of them are white, and I feel like this is going to come out and it will be proven wrong.
I mean, she's talking about them like they're white. Okay. Yeah. I mean, one of them might not be white, but I feel like it would have probably come up. The main characters are quite white. Jessica, you listened to another guide to polyamory that came out recently.
Yeah, I listened to the NPR Life Kit episode about how to, if thinking about non-monogamy, here's how to get started, kind of thing. And I think it's interesting just because of where the story is, right? NPR relatively recently, I think, started up this, their self-help sort of side of their productions, and Life Kit is a major podcast, and I mean, they have shows about many, many, many things. They produce a lot of stuff, but their target audience is, basically 40 something white women is like their largest demographic, especially for this stuff, is my understanding. And I thought it was solid. It was like, I thought it was good advice. They talked to interesting people. I think they had a pretty diverse range of sources, but it felt, as I was thinking about like this conversation that we're having tonight, it also felt a little bit like, we've talked about this issue of like people moving to a city and just like, you sort of show up and receive it exactly as it is in this moment. You don't understand like the history that came before, right? You have no sense of that context, and it feels, so in that way it feels like exactly like what you were just saying about like, this is what happens when some hot white people in Brooklyn discover a thing. Not that, this particular, like, again, not wanting to hate on journalists, and I do think they did a good job, represented a pretty good, like, range of perspectives, but it did feel like it was starting, it's like starting right now without looking back at all.
It's like it hatched from an egg in a cafe in Park Slope.
I like that the episode right before it is why it's okay to put dry clean only clothes in the washer.
Just so we have a sense of where,
Which I am interested in.
Yeah, I'm interested in that.
They have a lot of very valuable information in there.
And I think we've got to acknowledge that we did an entire episode where we were talking about how we were acting like we just showed up and discovered polyamory too. So I think there is just a little bit of that happens in waves. I've heard people who have practiced polyamory a lot longer than me talk about how, yeah, this kind of happens. It's like every handful of years, the media gets excited about polyamory and non-monogamy again, and then they all act like they've never heard of it, and it's so shocking, and it's changing everything, and then they don't talk about it again.
Yeah, that I wonder about that in terms of like the idea of marriage. Like when you frame things around marriage, I feel like Americans are like everybody just loves it as long as there's marriage. You know? Like gay marriage was cool because it was a marriage. And like in this, it did strike me in this New York Magazine article, it was framed around a polycule, and like everything that they were talking about was so like, it was all about the polycule, and so it was less about like the people's individual relationships like to each other and to themselves, and the change in that. It was like all about, you know, the cohesion between these four people, even though they kind of just didn't say anything about like the Alex guy, like what were his other relationships like, and obviously like that. It wasn't just this unit of four people. It was like they were only connected by the guy, Nick, that was having relationships with the two women, right?
Because straight.
But they wanted to frame it like this unit. And so they were using this sort of like marriage unit, nuclear family language and like frame to like, you know, the name of the article was, what is a polycule? And then they're like, there's this line where they're like, when a polycule is well-oiled and running smoothly, even the stickier situations are part of what makes it good. Like, they just talk about the polycule all the time, and it just made me realize, like, oh, they just, like, we really want this to be like a marriage.
Huh.
Well-oiled polycule is just, like, a very vivid picture.
Right. You want them all to be fucking in a pool of oil, but they're not.
Come on.
So, just to respond to that, I looked up the statistic. It was Pew Research in 2023. It was adults younger than 30. 51% said that an open marriage was acceptable, and 20% of all Americans report experimenting with some form of non-monogamy. So it's still very specific to younger people, but that's a big number.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say, in response to, you know, this well-oiled polycule vision, that I think you're hitting on another thing that's maybe not totally sitting with me, which is you can just hear people trying to make this not sound radical,
Right.
or weird, or different, or challenging to existing institutions or power structures. You just hear them being like, don't worry, we're going to do this, but it's not really going to fuck with anything that matters. You know? So I think that's...
Which is our favorite part of polyamory, right, guys?
That it,
fucks with things that matter.
yeah.
I mean, you guys are like doing the sex part too, which is probably pretty fun. It's my favorite part of polyamory. Putting the system on trial.
Yeah, it's putting the system on trial. It's interesting, the comparison to gay marriage in that sense. That again, there's a respectability, a kind of seeking of respectability, even in something that is so taboo in the way it's being presented.
Right. Yeah. And it's like you know, these people don't play by the rules, but like they don't play by the rules in the playing by the rules kind of way.
They don't play by the rules in the having tech jobs and...
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
okay.
one penis policies.
Go back to this other...
And one penis policies. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can I... This is from the beginning. Nick has noticed more of his friends testing it out, he tells me. His large friend group tends to share interest in things like changing the world and psychedelics. And he mentions many of them wind up hooking up with each other's partners and attempting to initiate play parties. So it's just like this sort of passing mention of like, they're interested in things like changing the world and psychedelics. So like, I just want to, I guess, sit with that for a second. Like, you want to change the world. That's fucking great.
Psychedelics, yay.
Yay. All of that is like awesome. And so like, this is like a good entry point into like, it's a good reason for questioning things like institutions around marriage and like the way that we approach
community and relationships,
right.
sex.
Yeah. And then a little bit later, he talks about getting into, I'm not actually sure which relationship he was talking. I think it's like he's already married to Sarah now, and then she's starting to have these other relationships. And then he's trying to like control what she does with her other partners. And then, I guess this is paraphrasing, but just like in retrospect, Nick realized he just wanted some control over the situation.
So there's some self-awareness there.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. It just made me think about that binary that we were talking about in this episode that I guess will come after this one. But like the idea that like you want to like change things and you want to be like free and liberated and like liberate the world, but you also want to be like safe and secure
And control how it happens. And
like,
I think based on your position to power, you might be more likely to think you can. Nick.
yeah, I don't. And it's like, in reality, you can't, those two things are related to each other, right? You can't change the world without giving up some of that privilege.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that distinction, I think, between the discomfort of having to give up some privilege, whether you do that by saying your real name in an article like this,
Yeah.
or
Bingo.
letting go of the internalized patriarchal ideas that tell you that your partner being with another person's penis threaten you.
Yep.
Those are the things that are actually going to change you, liberate you, and ideally contribute to a more liberated world. You don't get to hold on to all of the hierarchical power and then just experiment with the taboo things that are easy for you and think that that's entry into liberation.
Yep.
And I think there's nuance here, because I'm not saying people should do things that they're not ready for or they're scared of, in the sense that it's going to break a boundary or their trauma is activated. But I am saying you need to bring some awareness of that difference, and some discernment, I think, to the way you enter into polyamory. Yeah, I'll say it. I do think you need to do that.
Yeah. The world changing starts with another guy fucking your wife, Nick.
Take it from someone who knows.
Like, literally it doesn't, but like...
But it does.
It's never going to happen. The world is never going to change if you are...
Especially because you represent so much power.
Exactly. You are the one who has the power. Like, we know who this guy is, and he is the one who will stop that change from happening. He has the power. He's holding the power that would stop that change from happening.
Politically, and then also inside these relationships.
Yeah.
Because that power gets replicated, and we've talked about this, that kind of hierarchical, extractive, and potentially exploitive power will get replicated inside polyamory if you are not engaging with it. And I say that as someone who also needs to engage with it, and my privilege and how that can get replicated. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and the reason I'm getting saucy about this is because it's like...
We need to get Nick on the podcast.
Yeah, we do. Well, I mean, you have him right here. Like, he's me. That's why I'm like getting excited about it, because, yes.
I want to get
I'm
you a
talking
t-shirt.
to the tiny Nick inside of me.
Yeah, right. And I have compassion for Nick too. Yeah. And I have compassion for all of these people. Like, I am a white, privileged person in a marriage who owns a home. Like, I get it. I know what it feels like to want to be like, how about we do some light dabbling in revolution?
Right. Just hand jobs.
I would love to give Revolution a hand job. Revolution, if you're out there and listening, hit me up. So I get that. That's how co-option works, right? Is by telling people who are privileged and who are benefiting from privilege and oppressive systems that they can have some of the fun of the revolution,
right,
and not have to give up any of their privilege or anything they don't want to. Yeah. That is what American capitalism is a fucking pro at this. And that is what it feels like they're trying to do with polyamory.
Yeah. So
I don't like it.
This is a good segue into, I think the title of this episode is The Gentrification of Polyamory, right?
Yeah.
And your article was the New Yorker article.
Yeah.
That is not called that, but talks about that.
Yes, so it's by Jennifer Wilson. Yeah, I want to make sure I get her name right because many of these ideas are just straight from her article. It's so good. It's called How Did Polyamory Become So Popular? It came out on December 25th, so almost exactly a month ago. I had a bunch of people sent it to me, and I didn't read it because I was just having this like ick feeling. I was like, I don't want to read like another thing about how there's a bunch of like rich hot people experimenting with polyamory on a reality TV show or something. I'm like, I feel like it's going to depress me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. And then finally someone, my friend Joel, who was like, have you read this? You haven't read this yet? And then he sent me a screenshot from someone's Instagram. And then Jennifer Wilson, who wrote this article in the New Yorker, How Did Polyamory Become So Popular? As far as I can tell, when I Google the gentrification of polyamory, she's the one who said it.
She's like coined the phrase.
She's coined it. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, that is what is happening. That is what is not sitting well with me. That is what is feeling so ick. And it's not just feeling ick because I think that I'm better than that. It's feeling ick because I feel implicated in it. So I want to be super clear about that. That's when I was like, oh, the reason I'm not reading this is not because I'm too good. The reason why I'm reading it is because I don't want to. I'm afraid of what it might say about me. But
what does that mean?
Which part?
The gentrification of polyamory.
Well, so gentrification, and I mean, there are many more concise definitions for it than I could give, but the way we think about it is like in real estate and in culture, I think. The idea that often white, wealthy, often married people, but not always, come into neighborhoods that have historically been underserved and often BIPOC and poorer. And once they've become like trendy or appealing for whatever reason, they get to come in and buy up a bunch of property and change what that neighborhood feels like forever, and push a lot of the people who were originally there and built it into the thing that was attractive to everyone out. So
Yeah, you don't have to explain it to me. I am a lifelong gentrifier.
yes, exactly. I mean, this is like a soft,
Since the day I was
tender
born,
spot.
baby.
Yeah. Well, and maybe tell us a little bit about that statement because it feels kind of.
Oh, I mean,
relevant.
I guess just like my parents, the house that I grew up in was in like a gentrifying neighborhood in Seattle. And then we sort of, when we moved to Brooklyn, kind of on the leading edge of gentrification, and then moved from neighborhood to neighborhood in Brooklyn, like kind of following that edge to like
Back when we were
Bed-Stuy and
young, hot white people who got to discover stuff and get written about, right?
Yeah, we discovered Bed-Stuy, guys.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Ugh, God.
Yeah, and then we lived right by Mercy Projects too. And then we moved back here, and we like gentrified South Park a little bit for a second, and then we moved back kind of near to the neighborhood I grew up in, but in the more, less at the time gentrified neighborhood, and have gentrified that.
Yeah.
Now almost fully gentrified.
Yeah, there's more.
Yeah, there's more to go.
Yeah, I mean, and this is like, I don't know, this is some real heartbreaking, fucked up stuff right here. And I think applying that same feeling of like heartbreak and fucked upness to watching what seems to be happening with the media discussion of polyamory is uncomfortable, but interesting.
I think it's interesting because how does it apply to, you could sort of see the like the harm when it comes to real estate, the original version of gentrification. I do think that gentrification in that original sense is an interesting thing because it's like a phenomenon that happens on a systems level where it doesn't really make sense to blame the individual players a lot. Like people make a bunch of small decisions and then a thing happens. And like the people on kind of all sides of it make the decisions. Like people in this neighborhood sold their houses and cashed out, and that was a good choice for them. And people bought those houses, and that was a good choice for them. And like you can't really it's just like a thing that happens that is, not a good trend. And like, it's a change. But harm, it's characterized by harm, right? With polyamory, it's like kind of interesting to think about that because like, I don't think that identifying the harm is like quite as easy, or like it's not like quite the same. Like you're not pushing people out of the world of polyamory in the same way. So I want to kind of like pick that apart, but maybe it makes more sense to talk about the articles first.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I feel compelled to say is that there's like system level accountability for something like gentrification. And then there is also like individuals choosing how they engage with those systems. Right. And there's a spectrum of shitbaggery when it comes to gentrification. And you do absolutely have like agency in how you do it.
Light to heavy shitbaggery.
Yeah.
And what would be an example of heavy shitbaggery?
I mean, I think heavy shitbaggery is the idea that like you just keep doing real estate speculation, that maybe you come into a neighborhood, buy up a house at a pretty high price, fix it up, move 2 years later, do it again with a bunch more profit, do it again somewhere else. And I think you see that a lot in this town because a lot of people with that kind of money come here for tech jobs, and tech jobs are notoriously like not jobs that people root into. And so they kind of come, do that for a couple of years, then go do it somewhere else. And it's really extractive and
But an example of heavy shitbaggery that comes to mind for me that I think maps better to polyamory is that you show up in the neighborhood and you want it to be different right away. Like you come here and you say, oh, I'm glad that it's cheaper to live here and that there's like opportunity for the real estate value to appreciate, but I don't want it to be the way that it is, right? I love this funky character of this neighborhood, but somebody broke into my car and I'm fucking pissed about it. Or like the on-street parking is not satisfactory, or like, why is there garbage on the street? Or like that person walking down the street makes me nervous and I'm going to call the cops on them. Or like shit like that, right? You
start Karening around.
You start Karening around and you don't accept you want to retain all of your power.
And privilege.
And also, and what?
Investment.
Right. You want to keep all of that stuff and not you want to get all of the opportunity. And I'm not sure like exactly how that maps to kind of like the liberation or freedom, but I guess the economic freedom that you get from moving to a place that's cheaper and not give up any of the privilege that might come along with it.
How does that map to the idea of gentrifying polyamory? That idea of like showing up and being like, I'm here.
Just what I was just saying. Like you show up and you want to be able to fuck whoever you want and not have any of those boundaries. Or like any of those rules that were there, like that come with a traditional relationship structure or like a marriage, but you don't want to have to do anything scary.
Got it.
Or like, like a one penis policy would be like a good example of that. Like I'm going to show up as like a man who wants to have sex with other women, but I'm only okay with you having sex with women too, because that doesn't threaten me.
Right. There's another way I think it maps to polyamory, gentrification, and polyamory in the sense of something you said earlier, Jessica, about people not knowing the context and the history of something. So you were talking about how common that is in a city like Seattle, where you'll encounter people who moved here in the last couple of years, and so their sense of Seattle is just like the snapshot of it right now. And there's, of course, all of these layers of context and history and people who helped shape it in all of these different ways that have gotten lost along the way. And that's something that Jennifer Wilson ends up talking about a fair amount in her article, because she's doing a review of this big book, American Poly.
Oh, right.
And American Poly, it's like there's so many things to look up so I can properly cite all of the authors. But it's a very like comprehensive book of the more recent history of like free love in America, essentially, and the utopian communities who have practiced it for various reasons. And I don't know that she...
But like how, like like post 1960s, right? Or
Yeah. Hold on.
not like the 2010s.
Post 1960s.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about like Mormons?
That is not free love.
Okay, cool. Just checking.
Thank you for bringing that in here.
Oh boy.
First person who mentioned was Mormons in a conversation about polyamory loses.
Yeah.
Damn it. Okay, edit that out then.
You're fined.
But, you know, she talks about, like, I think the Oneida is a utopian community that practiced free love. And I think there have been other utopian communities that have. And then, of course, like, queer people. Queer people have been practicing forms of non-monogamy and polyamory and free love or whatever you want to call it for a really long time as alternative ways of building community and family inside of systems that didn't let them have community and family and actively blocked them from it. So that's just like a little bit of that kind of context that I think is missing in the way people are talking about polyamory and non-monogamy right now. And also because I feel like they're just talking about it like it's kind of a fun, sexy, like, accessory for rich people. You know?
Yeah.
It's
Can we
kind
call
of
it
like
a sexessory?
it reminds me a sexessory. It's like a fucking, I don't know if this exists, but like a Gucci Che Guevara t-shirt or something. You know, it's like it's got that feeling to it.
Can we make those available in our merch store?
Yes, totally.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like so many times what I hear the two of you, like the conclusion I hear you two coming to on this podcast over and over, if I may summarize crudely, is thought it was going to be all about sex parties, but it's actually about like understanding ourselves and each other and our communities on a much deeper level than we ever could have without doing this.
Yeah.
That is like the challenge and the gift of polyamory, kind of. And that it, forces you to like understand your own desire and your own trauma and attachment and communication in a way that like you don't have to when it's unexamined in the like sort of traditional script of traditional monogamous marriage. And so that it's like giving me that vibe too. What do you think?
Yeah, and that it isn't forcing you to examine the other institutions and power structures and ways of being in the world that you were just served up as unquestionable.
Right. Yeah, like you can try to be poly or be non-monogamous and hang on to every last bit of the privilege that you already had. And like, it's probably not going to work out.
It's definitely not going to work out for the people you date.
Right. And that's where the like question of harm comes in, I think. Yeah.
And it's notable to me, and we talked about this on the episode that's coming out next. A lot of times people in those privileged demographics and in those couples are people who end up dating folks with less money who are not as old as them, right? So there is like this imbalance of power that's happening there. And if that's happening in relationships where the people holding the power aren't aware of the way they're positioned in power or how they're wielding it, people will get hurt.
Yeah.
And there is harm that can
Yeah.
happen. It's not just like, oh, they're taking, this is me, Sarah, talking now. They're taking one of my revolutionary tools away from me and I'm mad. I mean, I am mad about that. But I think that there are some stakes, like some very human stakes there too that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And like coming back to the like the scales of douchebaggery or dipshittery or whatever. we're calling it.
Shitbaggery.
Shitbaggery.
The spectrum of shitbaggery.
Spectrum of shitbaggery. And like the gatekeeping thing. I do think that like like you and I are like guilty of all of this
Absolutely.
in the gentrification of regular gentrification and in the gentrification of polyamory too. And I think that you can like mitigate the harm that you do
Yes.
by, rather than being defensive about it, being cognizant of it.
Right.
And like trying to be more careful.
And the
know.
difference between being like, it's not me, and deflecting any kind of accountability and
Yeah.
saying like, it is me.
Yeah.
And that's why I need to be extra accountable.
Yeah. And when people call you on gentrification, the alternative, like my kind of answer to that has always, like internally at least, has always been like, yeah, I mean, I guess I could move to the suburbs where I quote unquote belong. And like the polyamory equivalent of that is be monogamous.
Right.
Which, like, yeah, I'm not going to do that.
And people who want to be liberated from the idea that that is what life has to look like, or the only way life can look, or whatever. I believe in their liberation too. I'm not trying to gatekeep polyamory from them.
Right.
That's great. I'm like, also, my instinct is to be like, get in here.
Exactly.
We want you. We need you. More people doing things that make people uncomfortable in this way, I think is a good thing. But you have to do it with some awareness, and you have to, I think, be aware of our culture's incredibly insidious ability to take something like this and just like package it as something that is not threatening and is only for these sort of moneyed classes.
Yeah.
And just making it really like slick.
Yeah. Right.
And,
like, watch out, Nick. They're coming for you. And like, it's going to happen with, like, I know everybody's pissed about like Field completely falling apart, and like the app is like, they did a rebuild and it's completely like kind of like not functioning. But like, I will take Field being a piece of crap product that's being run by people who still care over it getting sold to whoever and who commodifies it, and it's gonna happen like probably next year.
It's probably happening right now.
Yeah, they're like, doing the deal, and it's like this whole thing will probably go through a whole monetization cycle that will, co-opt it all. And I mean, I don't know what that will look like or whether it will really matter, but yeah.
So there's like a lot here, and there's a lot to talk about here. And I don't want it to sound like we're just crapping on everybody. I always want to
fun.
I always want to shit on myself first.
Not literally.
Not literally. What is it they say in comedy about like punching up? And I'm just like, punch myself in the face first.
Punch right in the middle first.
So what are some examples that you can think of, or that we can think of how we haven't been accountable in this way, or we might have contributed to this phenomenon that people could maybe like learn from, hold on to, not repeat?
I can't think of any.
I've never made a single
perfect in every
mistake.
Like specific examples? I mean, just like, definitely like dating younger people, holding on to the power in terms of like, this came up so much in the episode that we recorded about solo poly folks, and just like trying to preserve the privilege and safety in our relationship when we first started, and like trying to just always like consolidate that, and kind of like externalize all of the risk, which is like, it's a tricky one because
and
there's
it's understandable.
Also,
and a little bit that is a phase that people will go through in doing something that's scary.
Yeah, none of the people in the article that I read had children or community, and I think the community part. I guess I'm sidestepping this question now. So what were you thinking? Let's like actually answer it before I start talking about something else.
I didn't want anything to change.
Right.
I think like the big mistake I made was just, is there a way that I can cling to the edge of the pool? Can I date women but not call myself queer publicly? Can I control what Alex does, or the way he approaches his relationships, so I feel like I can control what happens between the two of us, with a bunch of like rules and anxiety and surveillance. What's the other things that I've done? I think early on I had partners that I kind of experimented on, and just like didn't really think of them in their like whole personhood, you know, because I was just like, well, these are just like some non-monogamy polyamory kink freaks out here. They won't care if I show up in their life and then leave. You know, I think it was extractive, and I am not proud of that. And I think it's always challenging to have compassion for mistakes, which I think you have to. This is not about perfection, because if it is, then you're just also repeating some stupid bullshit, oppressive systems all over again. But you really have to be accountable. You really do. You got to learn from it, and you have to embrace that. For me, polyamory is a fucking master's class in change and in letting go and in staying accountable and like trying to live as much in that stream as I can, which, you know, I succeed at and I fail at. But yeah, I have plenty of mistakes I made for sure. Yeah. What about Jessica? What did you observe, or have you observed, or how do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think that this is adorable about us. But as you were listing off like the different neighborhoods that you've lived in, you mentioned South Park, where we lived in like the early mid 2000s. And one thing that we did when we moved there was be like, whoa, South Park. Anyone ever heard of this place? Let's make a radio show about it.
Right.
You know, which then also, as you guys have been discovering polyamory, we also, I mean, it's not like we acted like no one ever heard of it before, but we decided
But
to
there
make
was a little bit of like, hey guys,
hey, check it out. We're, you know, some hot people from Seattle who discovered a thing.
Yeah. Well, and you did write a cover story in Seattle Met magazine about polyamory like 2 years ago.
Yeah, but I don't live in Brooklyn, so nobody read it.
No.
There's another piece of this that I want to shade in. You know, I could just sit here and talk about how I think Jennifer Wilson's article is brilliant all the way through, and I just realized as I was looking at my notes and my screenshots and things that I highlighted that it was basically the whole article, so people should just go read that article.
Start with page 1.
But it's interesting that it is a review of This American Poly, this huge anthology, and it's also a review of More, which is a memoir about a middle-aged married woman with children who opens up her marriage. And so I have not read the memoir. Many people that I know read it within a week of it coming out.
Wow.
Just like breathlessly.
You're like, I haven't read it, but many of my friends have.
Well, I say that.
That's how I am about a lot of books.
But I say that to just
Sarah's
say
read it. I don't know.
People are hungry for this material, and people in polyamory are really hungry for it, and a lot of people in my practice read it before, you know, a lot of my clients had read it before me. I'm like, they're like, have you read this? And I'm like, how have you read this? Like, just came out. Yeah. So people are really hungry for this material, and I don't have anything to say about the memoir itself, you know, not having read it. But I think that this article, Jennifer Wilson, again, identifies in that memoir and in this media coverage in general, this sense of like, more. That is literally the title of.
Yeah.
More. I
That's
want more.
interesting.
I want more. I want more. And she quotes, and this one kind of like was a little bit of a dart right to my heart. She was like, you know, poly people are always saying this thing about how love is abundant and you can't approach love from a scarcity mentality. And of course, I love that quote also because I think of that in terms of like larger scale orientations to systems like capitalism and money. But Wilson's point is, if you're just like gathering more and more things for you, that's not really abundance. It's not really a different way of living. It's still just the same people getting more things. And it's not reciprocal. And it's not dismantling of these systems that maybe have actually perpetuated scarcity mindsets and exploitive mindsets.
Yeah. And you're not saying you love that quote like you agree with it. You're saying you love the critique inside of the quote.
Well, I was saying that, like, that quote, love is abundant, and the more love you give and receive, the more there is in the world, is probably something I've said. That's like a pretty common quote quote in polyamory.
Yeah. Right. But when you put it into the context of thinking about it related to capitalism, it's like being like, well, we can just go to space and we'll just mine asteroids and get,
we'll get another planet in here.
Or
this planet's junked up. Let's go get another one.
Or we can just I'll just keep investing and have infinite returns and stuff like that. Like there is always limits on what you can receive, and this comes up a lot in all of these articles. Like they're always talking about like the scheduling, like time is the only finite resource, right? And I think it's definitely interesting to think about like where those limits do exist.
I think so too, and I'd like to read a couple of these quotes. She's talking about a quote from Moore, this memoir, and the quote is, "Because love is vast," she tells us, "abundant, infinite in fact, and the secret is this, love begets love. The more you love, the more love you have to give," end quote. And then this is Wilson. "But there is no articulation of what that abundance might look like beyond her private life and the private spaces in which it unfolds. Ultimately, Roden Winter's memoir represents a very specific, arguably very American version of polyamory, the extension of abundance culture to all corners of the bedroom, but absolutely nowhere beyond."
Yeah, so what does that mean? What would be the beyond?
Well, and then that's where I want to do this other quote. "As ethical non-monogamy becomes the stuff of park slope marriages and luxury perfume ads, it's worth remembering that revolutions don't fail, they get co-opted, often by people who can afford co-ops. You can..." Cute. I see what you did there.
Burn.
"You can understand why Roden Winter might believe that she is ushering in a bright, abundant future by opening up her marriage. A good love affair, when you're inside of it, feels like it could change the world. But changing the world takes more than spreading the love. You have to spread the wealth, too. Maybe that's just utopian, hippie nonsense. But what can I say? I'm a romantic." And that's what it means to me, is like, why are you doing this? Why have multiple sexual romantic partners? Why move beyond these traditional definitions of marriage and monogamy? Is it really just so you can have had a lot of sex with different people? Mm-hmm. I mean, if it is that, I don't really want to judge it, but I think as a representation in culture, I would like it to be acknowledged as having more depth and potential. Mm-hmm. That there really is like disruptive, revolutionary potential in it, in the liberation of the experience of having sex outside of what is seen as acceptable, of exploring parts of yourself that don't get explored elsewhere, of building community, and of questioning other systems as well. And I want to see polyamory represented that way, because I think it's important and I think it deserves to be represented that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'm curious what those other things are for you, like in those relationships, like in your relationships, like how do they feel like more than just more sex? Or I can try to answer first while you think about it. Because I was thinking about it when you were saying that.
I'm like, we're going to have to audit my sex life. I'm like, well, it's not that much sex, honestly.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there has been times when I've felt like, it's not just doing, like, to some extent, it's like doing the thing that's different feels meaningful, right? But also that you're like making connections with people where you're like bringing in like ideas and like knowledge and feelings. And like in the New York Magazine article, they talk about this, like, with like kind of like skill sets and like an interest in gemstones, shit like that. I'm just like, okay. So they're like beginning to touch on some of that stuff, or like the capacities of their partners. Like, this person's really analytical, and I really appreciated that this person over here was more emotive or whatever. So a rich pastiche of experience that you don't get with being in partnership with one person. But I think what I'm talking about is more like an understanding of the world and perhaps like ways to transform it that are more robust and that like inform each other, right? And that can feel like really actually revolutionary. Yeah.
And I think it can be even more specific than that. It's like the first serious relationship that I had after we opened up our marriage was with someone who was like a really committed, involved activist. And it revitalized a lot of my identity around being an activist and getting involved in and supporting direct action because of that. One of my other former partners, became a music collaborator that you and I still work with. We were at a music-related event just today with someone who we know through polyamory and dating. There's
there's like creativity
in that. I'm thinking about the queer happy hour that I've helped to start, and with a bunch of polyamorous people. You know?
And I think the trust that you build with people in those kinds of relationships, not just sexual, but whatever, romantic or however you want to characterize them, is a deeper level of trust that you build faster also, that would make you be able to change the world in ways big and small more deeply, and is disruptive of capitalism, right? It's literally replacing commercial relationships that capitalism wants you to have in a commercial space,
which are not relational, but they're extractive.
And capitalism wants you to have those only with your nuclear family.
Yeah.
Right. And once
and blood ties.
And blood ties. And polyamory probably is encouraging you to build those connections with a broader base of people. And I think maybe what these articles are kind of missing, or the article that I read is sort of missing, is being just do that with 4 people and we'll put it in a neat little box. And then if you feel like you need some space from that, go sublet an apartment in Brooklyn for $4,000 a month and it will be fine. And the difference is no, build ties where you support each other with mutual aid,
and you stay in community, and you let relationships change to be supportive of each other. And I would say also, when people are already practicing something or living in a way that is different, non-traditional, and even taboo, those are folks who tend to be more questioning of other systems too. And then that has its own sort of generative properties, where it has encouraged me to think more radically about the world around. I'm so radicalized, so much more radicalized, believe it or not, over the course of the past 4 years of us being polyamorous than probably any other period of my life. And of course, that period also maps to COVID, the George Floyd uprisings, the overturn of Roe v. Wade, and now the genocide in Gaza. So there's a lot to get radicalized about, but I think the level of just commitment to those radical values and to being involved in every single one of those political movements and resistance, I think it has been informed by polyamory. I think that would feel much more compartmentalized and a little bit more like I was a tourist, kind of visiting those values or those issues, and less like I was living them. I think polyamory has taught me a lot about what it feels like to live those values in a more integrated and everyday way.
Because you're learning how to trust people and care about people and
stay in discomfort
with people,
and challenge your privilege and talk about it and think about how the world is fucked up and ways that we could help make it different. I think polyamory has taught me a lot about that. And I want Nick and Sarah and all of these other people to get that experience too. But my fear, of course, is that co-option, that cultural co-option machine is at work.
And they'll just get sold a poly scheduling project management app.
Or I was just people are probably doing some sort of real estate speculation on the rise of polyamory and alternative ways of living right now.
Cool. Startup ideas. You heard them here first.
We should
copyright. If I just say that.
Trademark. Yeah. So I think that it feels like a crossroads right now of where is this going to go? Where does polyamory go in the culture? Does it continue to be something that is disruptive and is seen as really challenging of existing structures? Or is it going to be just pulled in and just smooth out the edges and everything just keeps clipping along? And I really hope that it's the former, not the latter.
Yeah. I believe it can be.
Me too. I mean, and again, to quote Jennifer Wilson, because I'm a romantic.
Oh,
You know?
Yeah.
I believe in revolution. And I believe that people in change and people's ability to embody it.
Yeah, well, and polyamory being on trend it's not on trend because fucking, the New Yorker and New York Magazine and Brooklyn Literati book publishers decided that they wanted it to be. Those articles came out because it was on trend.
That's right.
And it's on trend because people are feeling a thing. It's not because they're trying to fuck more. It's because they're feeling this change.
And the
right?
sense that maybe we could, maybe we must, maybe we have to live differently. And that is just, I'm stay close to that feeling. Nick, you got to get closer to that feeling.
It's not because rich people are bored. And the thing that Nick and all his friends being interested in psychedelics and changing the world, that's a good instinct.
So I'm interested. I also just want to invite listeners who are also noticing this trend and have feelings about it and other examples of it or examples of people kind of countering this co-option of polyamory. I want to know more about, what people are noticing out there. So send them our way.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah. So this was interesting. We did this at night instead of in the morning. So you all we're drinking
Night vibes.
San Juan seltzers. Uh-oh. Are we going to get sponsorship?
Yes, we're seeking sponsorship from San Juan Seltzer. I am your largest customer.
They're like, oh, Jessica, we already know you.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. Thanks for setting it up and hopping on quickly so that we could talk about it. I was feeling really excited about this idea. So thanks
for sure. We'll be back in 1 week with another episode that is a heater.
Yeah, it is.
It's a banger.
It is.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this midnight mini episode. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at MistakesCast or email us at
mistakescast@gmail.com, I think.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah.
That's the one. And we'll put all of these articles in the show notes so people can read them.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.